Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are today. Today is February 1st, 2023. We've made it through January. And despite everyone calling doom and gloom and Bitcoin going to 10,000 or to zero in some cases, we have risen. It is coming up. We're at 24,000 and rising. And it seems to be a relatively healthy crypto market, which is running the way that we see it most times. Bitcoin will lead the rally. I'm not calling this a rally in any way, shape, or form, but Bitcoin is kind of leading. ETH is still a little bit quiet, but generally, if we are seeing some semblance of a rally, we'd see ETH and then the alts and everything else. The reason I'm bringing that up today is that all of those alts and all of these companies are actual companies. They have backgrounds, they have people that are generally invested in building them, growing them, scaling them, and everything else. And most investors have no concept or clue as to what's actually behind these coins, behind these concepts, and behind these Web3 companies. So I'm really excited today because we have Jeffery from Galaxy, rebranded from Galaxy Digital. I'll screw that up all the entire time during this podcast. But really, Jeffrey, you have a long history in M&A. And I think that too often people really focus on the VC side of things and not really understand what an acquisition or merger or acquisition is, especially in a space like this. So with all of your experience, I'm really excited to have you here today. But before we get into Galaxy, I really want to dive into a little bit of your history, if you don't mind, kind of starting with, your first exposures into kind of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, but also, your work history prior to that, which is quite studious.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for having me on the show, Jay. And so my name is Jeffery Ugbah. I'm a director within Galaxy, or Galaxy Digital, as I sometimes misremember the actual name of my company. But it's great to be here and happy to start off with a little bit of an introduction for myself. And so the thing that I would probably say, which is the core thread through my career, at least the later half of my career, is gaming in some capacity. And so I grew up as a gamer. I used to play Pokemon Blue on my Game Boy Pocket and Zelda and Need for Speed and GoldenEye and all these different games. And just noticed even back then that it was a place where I wanted to dedicate a good portion of my career just because of the sense of community that it can generate, but also the amount of engagement that you can produce. And so, starting from the very beginning, grew up in Houston, Texas, traditional immigrant family story. My parents came from Nigeria, came to the U.S. in the late 80s. I was born here in Texas, two younger sisters, and was fortunate enough to make it to Harvard for undergrad, where I studied the history and philosophy of science. And so, a little bit of a science geek, a little bit of a history buff at the same time. And from there, I think, tried very hard to jump into the gaming industry directly
Hmm.
by applying to different companies. One in particular I remember was Bethesda, which was acquired by Microsoft actually in 2020 for about $7.5 billion. Unfortunately, was unsuccessful at that time and decided to go the more traditional consulting route in that moment. But from there was, quasi consultant for a number of years, went to business school at Wharton and, decided then and there that I really wanted to learn the practice and, the strategy around M&A and in particular, eventually getting to gaming M&A as a specific category. And so started my career at a bank in New York called Evercore, where I worked on a lot of different types of transactions, probably, focusing a little bit more towards the TMT end of the spectrum. And then from Evercore, I moved over to PJT Partners, which is another New York-based boutique bank, only working on gaming transactions. And so advising the likes of Sony Interactive Entertainment and Epic Games on some of their recent acquisitions. And so I guess the question is what brings me here today, and it's really about marrying, my understanding and kind of my training when it came to gaming and when it came to M&A in this Web3 space. And so, as you mentioned, Jay, it's very much an early innings type of opportunity where a lot of the major corporate actions are more around raising capital as opposed to going through full-on acquisitions. And so, I see myself as being at the ground floor for a lot of these companies that are very rapidly, creating equity value for themselves and in many cases very rapidly destroying equity value for themselves as well. So it's been a very interesting journey and trip, I would say.
But yeah, and this is where like having your 10,000 hours. And I know not everyone agrees with the Malcolm Gladwell thing, but I absolutely subscribe to it. There's no substitution for your 10,000 hours, the successes, failures, lessons, and learnings along the way to get to where you are today, which is a highly volatile asset class that despite all success, a company can still fail. And so really understanding those gray metrics that most people may not be able to read between the lines is absolutely why it's so imperative to have those 10,000 hours in an emergent asset class like Web3.
I 100% agree, and I think that the critical insight that I've gained just being in this sector for about 7 or 8 months. I started at Galaxy Digital Galaxy back in May of last year, as everything was crumbling all around us. Is that the business models themselves, part and parcel, resemble more traditional quote unquote Web 2 business models in a lot of cases. And so, when you're thinking about what is the path to profitability, what are the unit economics, you can actually take some corollaries from the Web 2 ecosystem or the Web 2 marketplaces and extract and extrapolate from those insights to understand and value and determine whether or not certain transactions and certain acquisitions make sense on the Web 3 end of the spectrum. So it's definitely something that I've relied on heavily to be able to evaluate some of these different opportunities.
And again, you've been around a long, long enough, not trying to age you, but you remember the days of companies that had no revenue, no IP, no really almost no staff, getting hundreds of millions of dollars valuation on concepts because investors and companies like suddenly are caught flat-footed as an emerging asset class appears, and they need something, they need someone to be able to showcase that they have there, and that's a very tough position to be in when you're going, I'm buying a concept that may or may not come to fruition.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is the investors themselves and the capital allocators, they don't know what they don't know, and they are absolutely terrified of FOMO, right? And so they don't want to miss whoever the next Sorare might be, for example, or whoever the next Axie Infinity before it crashed was, for example. And so as a result, the very strict amounts of diligence that they do conduct on some of these opportunities kind of sort of goes out the window if you understand who else is in the team of folks that are investing into some of these properties.
Yeah, that's a question I just have, and before we get into Galaxy here, I always, I'm not an M&A guy. I've done enough to be dangerous and understand the language. Traditionally more VC based, and generally in that case, I'm investing in the team. The concepts, at an early angel or seed phase, like they're going to pivot, they're going to change, it's going to evolve, and so you want to make sure, are they coachable? Do they understand the larger concepts outside of just the scope they're in? Because if you have to shift, you have to pivot, you have to grow, expand, anything else, you need the team to really be there, and that's a very different skill set than looking at numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it actually makes my life very easy at Galaxy because I'm very focused on anything to do with blockchain or Web 3 gaming. And very quickly, I can evaluate opportunities based on the team's individual members and what types of actual gaming experience that they do have. Right. And so, going through and flipping through that kind of a page and realizing that not a single person has gaming experience is an easy way to kind of discount or at least discredit this opportunity just because game design in and of itself and by itself is extremely difficult. I think, there's a little bit of a power law distribution when you think about gaming in general. 80 to 90% of all Web 2 games are economic failures. They don't recoup their development
Wow.
costs. They don't recoup their marketing costs. And so if you were to extrapolate that to Web 3, it actually goes from 80 to 90% to 98 to 99% of all Web 3 games are economic failures to the same degree.
And Web3 has proven one thing, which is that NFTs are easily the most successful, not for being able to produce games, but easily the most successful fundraising model for hopes and dreams that has ever occurred,
Mhm.
because you can globally say, I'd like to produce a AAA game, here's my concept for the game, here's a beautiful white paper and all these other things. But if you actually take a second look at the team, none of them have any experience. They don't even know anyone that can produce a AAA game. And right now, even the AAA studios are scrambling and dying with major revenue to find people that understand how to build inside these things. So it makes your job much harder when you've got every one of your friends, family, relatives going, hey, here's the next you know uh, you know game of anything, that you've got to now weed through and go like, okay, it's great that they're in college and it's great that they have a concept and they know how to deploy an NFT. Who's going to build this thing?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I'm a little bit of a quote unquote black sheep within Galaxy because I think right when I started, I said very much upfront, "Hey guys, listen, on Web 3 gaming, on blockchain gaming, this was back in May. I'm very much near term bearish, but long term bullish, and I'm near term bearish because." very frankly, all of the games that I've seen that are quote unquote popular, I personally have never had a strong desire to play myself. And if you don't have that one kind of component in gaming, you've pretty much lost the thread. There's really no point to kind of continue as an ongoing concern because you haven't really activated your community for the long term, which I think is really critical in almost every successful gaming franchise that's out today.
Yeah. So, and I completely agree, and I'm really excited for this conversation to continue. So as we transition, and I really want to hear kind of Galaxy and how you guys are thinking about the space. But when I look at blockchain and Web3, it is the most dynamic change that can come to gaming that doesn't actually have to build the games. A game that runs on blockchain, like literally running on like decentralized servers, is insane. There's latency is a huge thing. Unless you're talking role playing games, but
Mhm.
if you want to get like a first person shooter, like that's a whole business model in and of itself that has nothing to do with blockchain, compared to assets and identities and all those things. So what are some of the concepts that Galaxy is really focusing on that are absolutely kind of guaranteed, almost not nothing's guaranteed, but have the highest viability of success to integrate with current AAA level games?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I would actually point to anything related to cheat detection when it comes to online
Mhm.
competitive gaming, right? And so
Okay.
there are several companies out there that use, either public or private ledger technology in order to identify, okay, these specific players, if you were to cross-reference, their current login with their history of playing, have shown signs of cheating in past games, either by replicating the activity or the move sets of an AI or a computer generated player, right? Which
Hmm.
means that they have some type of AI assistance, or by just playing in a tournament in which their level is just so much higher than everyone else's, implying that they actually should be in a higher level tournament than another party. And so the whole realm of gaming infrastructure that has real utility, I think, is really where Galaxy in particular is doubling down. But it's really about improving the experience of gamers overall. One easy way to do so is to identify the cheaters and kind of strip them out of the gaming experience for the average player who wants to have a genuinely authentic competitive experience.
Yeah, and same as you, I'm a lifelong gamer. My first experience to Bitcoin was I was actually playing Eve Online, and if anyone has ever played Eve Online, it's also referred to as spreadsheets in space. It can be extremely boring at times where you're just spending hours sitting around doing nothing, and that was where somebody was talking about Bitcoin, and early 2010 I bought 100 of them for $20 off of them, and a bunch of us did as we were floating around, and it was an interesting concept of digital money, but it didn't shake out. That being said, coming forward, I play Call of Duty right now with my teenage boys, and I'm absolutely horrible at it, but I can instantly see where a AAA game like Call of Duty and the Call of Duty franchise is so fractured.
Mhm.
That it does not from game to game to game of just the one franchise. It does not recognize me as a player. That I have different assets in different games. It doesn't recognize that I've played this game before, and these are compatible items. And even if the game studio says, "Look, we never want you to take your guns and give them or sell them on a secondary market," we can see that the future is very capable for that to happen in a go forward capability to allow for a secondary market to exist of weapons and third party assets and games and skins and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. The challenge though is that gamers, as you're very well aware, are probably not only the most fickle entities, but also the most vocal. And so it's it's a thing that comes up again and again, where history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. There was a huge amount of outrage against the incorporation and integration of NFTs into a lot of the online shooter games in particular. So the Ubisoft's titles come up for me, but the outrage was, hey, we have these different methods of monetizing our players that you guys are already using in order to extract rents from us through microtransactions, through battle passes, through downloadable content. We don't want another layer of rent seeking added on top of that, which quite frankly is very similar to the outrage that happened back in the mid to late 2000s about we don't want this free to play mechanic on top of our existing games. But here we are in 2023, and free to play is really kind of a household concept for most folks, where they understand that, hey, it's actually very beneficial to have a gaming experience that you can try out first before buying cosmetics, skins, weapons that could perhaps increase the utility of the game for myself. I think the same thing is probably going to happen, if not already happening, when it comes to the use of NFTs in gaming today.
So when we really think about, there's been a lot of guesses on where Web3 and gaming are going to intersect, and we've seen some of them play out. We saw Axie Infinity, which is all on chain, all you play it for 5 minutes and you're bored. But people play it for days and days and days because you could actually play to earn, you could play to live. And there was people in third world countries that were making more money sitting on a dirt road, with a $5-10 little Android device than they were in fields working hard labor or sweatshops. And
Mhm.
so I entirely applaud the concept that somebody can learn a skill that does not put them in harm's way. And by the way, most of those, they had education to help them understand how to grow inside of Axie Infinity and create guilds and use DeFi and learn finance. And so I thought, from kind of an education standpoint, in a way to help really elevate, I loved the concept. Hated the execution. But what was your kind of feelings over Axie's run, kind of up and down, lessons along the way?
Yeah, I mean, the one critical lesson that I remember from the very kind of beginning of just watching YouTube videos about Axie Infinity, because that's my first access point in terms of buying a new game, is, does this even look like it's fun to play? And from my perspective, the answer was clearly no. This doesn't look like it's very fun. I didn't even try to buy one of the Axies in order to participate in the ecosystem. It seemed a little bit convoluted, and for me, that is really the trigger point of saying, "Hey, this is something that actually has legs and has longevity," versus not. I'm not surprised by the fact that a lot of people, jumped onto the Axie bandwagon in the first place, because it tends to attract folks that are looking for a fast come up, so to speak, or looking for a quick way to generate an ROI for themselves. But there's a little bit of a asymmetrical distribution between the people that are benefiting from the ecosystem in a normal way and those that are seeking to exploit it and exploit the distribution of digital assets within that ecosystem as much as possible, almost in kind of a mercenary like capacity. I think you saw a lot of that with Axie Infinity. I think it, in another sense, it degraded the experience for every other player who were either trying to make money or just have fun overall. And so I think the key lesson there is, when you are trying to open up an economy for the public, the broad public market, you have to have some controls in place to protect against mercenary players that are exploiting the existing, sink and faucet mechanisms when it comes to, the distribution of some of these new digital assets.
And none of these concepts are new.
Correct.
They're looked at a little differently in Web3, and traditional games. And you can go back to Dungeons and Dragons. You can go back to any of these things. There's always a gray market or a black market for counts in games. And in fact, I don't League of Legends and everywhere else. There's entire shops of kids that are sitting over in third world countries, or sometimes first world countries. It can be anywhere, that are just leveling up random players and then selling the entire account, through eBay or a variety of sources. And it really doesn't, scale. It doesn't work, and it's very unsafe, and kind of degrades a lot of, like you say, around the game, because they're very predatory in nature. The concept is, if with Axie and others, is if you create a proper marketplace using smart contracts, NFTs, that everyone can win, that the buyers are secure, they get what they want, the game studio gets a cut of the sale, and the seller, whoever leveled them up, kind of has a reason to be there, and they feel good about creating value for themselves or for others. How close am I to reality on
No,
that?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that, the progenitors of what we understand crypto to be today, they all used to gold farm. They all used to experience farm. They all used to use, Warcraft or EVE Online or RuneScape, to first understand economic principles, market principles,
Mhm.
and migrated that understanding into what we're now describing as Web3. And so I think that there is a huge educational component, that's a part of that, that you actually never lose, right? And it can be applied to so many different domains, which is kind of a phenomenal thing to think about. this we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for gaming and some of the things that you can do in gaming and exchanging, in-game time and experience for some type of economic value.
That's, I mean, a great thought. So, jumping back over to Galaxy, what's kind of your biggest initiatives, right now that are, underneath your platform of gaming? What's kind of the major initiatives of things you're looking for, and really, either you're succeeding in finding them, or you're kind of like, these don't exist yet, but we hope that they do soon.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think one of the biggest initiatives is really locating games and Web3 games in particular that have successfully integrated Web3 functionality or crypto functionality without detracting from the overall gaming experience. I think that there are two major criteria that we really look at. Number one, is this game fun without any type of overlay when it comes to either implementing wallets or exchanging crypto or fiat on ramp off ramps? Is this game just fundamentally fun, right? And then number two, can this game survive and thrive in what we were in previously, which is a bear market, right? Because it's very easy for all ships to rise if the tide is very high in a bull market. But the games that are sustaining themselves today in what is arguably one of the worst markets in crypto in a long time are the ones that can probably sustain themselves for the long term and also have the strongest communities behind them as well. So it's really a focus on kind of those two elements. And there's always questions around yield sustainability. If you have some type of staking mechanism, there's questions around, how do you, build an authentic community as opposed to, attracting mercenaries. And so there's a lot of different questions, that we ask in the near term, but it really is about, how do we make this experience fun for everyone?
Great answer. I love that. So, let's circle back around to the term you just said, community, which to me is the largest, or one of the largest factors of Web3 that really doesn't exist. It exists in Web 1 and Web 2,
Mhm.
but in Web3, it's a dynamic change
Yeah.
because your community is generally your investors. They're generally your shareholders. They are help driving this project and product with you because you have the ability to ask questions and get feedback
Mhm.
and engage with them. How do you measure, or even come about really understanding the community behind some of these games?
Yeah, listen, I really love that question. I actually would disagree with you on the definition of a community. Um,
Please.
I guess first and foremost, for me, when I think about a community, I think about myself playing, Pokemon or Smash Brothers or GoldenEye. It's been, I don't know, 20 years since I started playing those games. But if I were to pick them up today, I would still be able to play them. I would still roughly understand the dynamics of what's going on. I would still be able to engage with a 10-year-old kid who wanted to play me in Super Smash Brothers, and we would have a pretty good match and pretty good challenge. And what I'm implying by that is that you have a very, very long term perspective and you have an anticipation that you're going to be in this ecosystem in some capacity, either a lot or a little bit for a long period of time. I would actually argue that the structure of certain investments within my ecosystem is such that it doesn't encourage people to be in it for the long haul. And so a really good
Hmm.
example of that would be, a lot of crypto focused or crypto centric investors, they have a much shorter path to liquidity when you compare it to traditional venture capital and growth equity. So for them,
Absolutely.
you know, it's very attractive to receive some type of compensation or some type of return in the form of tokens that have a 12-month cliff, and then those same tokens are vesting over a 12 to 36-month period of time. Now that the implication, from my perspective, in that kind of a structure is, all right, they start generating a return from their investment in year one and then across the subsequent 2 to 3 years. But after that 3 year point, they've essentially returned their investment, right? And so the question that I always ask is, can you really build a company that is built to last over a 3 year period? Could you build Amazon over 3 years versus the 10 to 15 years it actually took to kind of get that engine roaring at the end of the day? Very different from the traditional kind of venture equity time horizon where you actually don't even have an opportunity to receive a return until year 5 or year 7 or year 10, depending on your fund life. And so those guys are quote unquote in it to win it, because if their company fails in which they put in an investment, then that's really just writing off the entire investment. So they're encouraged to actively participate in kind of the strategic direction of those companies, actively engage with the management teams, actively try to find solution to ensure that this company is successful. So long story short, you know, if you have a mixture, I think it's better. But if it's strictly token based, I think you end up with a lot of folks that are able to kind of cut and run, 3 to 4 years down the line, which you can't really build, in my opinion, a very strong, long lasting company over that period of
I, what everyone just listened to was a master's course, and build and truly, it really that's it's so detailed and so thought out what the answer you just gave, and I want to really kind of draw attention to the audience that they're listening. Go back and listen to what Jeffrey just said again, because it is a dynamic change. The ability to have investors exit as the second the game launches, and pull liquidity away from the operators and from that launching a game. Congratulations, you just made it to the starting line.
Exactly.
Like now we have to go like grow and expand and everything else. And if you have too much liquidity sucked out right at the beginning as an entrepreneur and a CEO, like that's terrifying, that's horrifying. And so there's a lot of things we can do around it, but I really agree with that answer around community and continuing engagement and keeping them excited and invested in there.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
what? Oh, please
No,
continue.
I was going to add that, you see it with certain Web2 game properties that have been in a funding mode for almost 10 years now. Star Citizen, I'm a huge, space sim geek. And so they're a Kickstarter based game development studio. They're huge at this point. They haven't yet released a game, but they are very actively engaged with their community in terms of building new games, building more rich renders and higher fidelity experiences over the long term. While that in and of itself is something that you don't see as much in kind of a Web3 ecosystem. Now, on the flip side, if I were to ever see an investment come down my pathway that says, hey, the cliff doesn't start until year 4 or year 5, and then it vests ratably over the next 2 to 4 years, that's a completely different situation, right? Because you're in it, to win it. You have a ton of skin in the game, and you can't really see a return at all until you get to the later period of your existing hold.
Yeah, and a 4 year cliff for any professional VC was like, oh, we get out early, really? Like
Exactly.
you're letting us out before year 7 and 8. That's a fabulous deal there.
Exactly.
So sometimes, and I think this is always important. There's a lot of people that build some really amazing projects, Web 2, Web 3. Like I mean, gorgeous, amazing, projects, products. Deploy them, and they're absolutely fabulous. And they were built for a market of zero.
Mhm.
No one cares. They fail, initially die on the vine because they were built in a silo that nobody wanted that or needed that. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that's gaming. And you're really the one that understands it. What is, kind of the current total market cap of gaming, and where do you see that elevating? Because and to preface the reason for the ask is I've seen that gaming will overtake, TV and movies, whether it already has or is going to soon. And that's a big dynamic shift into why blockchain and Web 3 is so attractive to integrate into gaming.
Yeah, no, we my team has done a lot of research into this, and I think if you look at the gaming market holistically, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of slice that. I think the broadest consensus is around a current market today of about 180 billion to 200 billion, growing at about a 10% kicker, right? And so this is just strictly kind of Web 2 gaming, no Web 3 gaming overlay. I would imagine that over time that slice that is the Web3 section is or segment is going to get larger and larger and will definitely grow at 10 plus 20 plus% CAGR over the next 10 years. And so that's kind of the way that I like to size the opportunity. But you're right in that gaming has already eclipsed music and film when it comes to revenue generation. So we put together some materials, one page or one slide of it has gaming at about 184 billion dollars for 2022. I think music and film together is less than, I want to say, 120 billion dollars in total, right? And if you think about gaming as like the pinnacle interactive entertainment experience, you have your linear media elements, you have your interactive elements, you have music already there, you have acting already there. A lot of cases for the AAA titles, and so it actually encapsulates what you're seeing for a lot of the other modalities of entertaining yourself in some of these other platforms.
So a concept I want to talk to you about, and I think you'll probably, hopefully we can geek out on this a little bit and you'll get excited, is generally, if I ran into you at a conference, a restaurant or anything else, one of the last things we'd ever bring up in random conversation is gaming. But it really is so important to even, like I'm in my mid 40s, and like I would love to talk about games. So I love it. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really much more engaging to play a game than it is to passively sit and watch a movie or stream it.
Mhm.
And the concepts that we're seeing happen right now is that Web3 is such an emerging class that nobody really understands it. It's you see this as well. Someone's like, hey, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve the same problem over here, and nothing connects, nothing aligns. But the concept of like I digital ownership, digital identity, that like this is me, and then I don't want to go hunt things down. I'm never going to say, hey Jeffrey, check out my Microsoft Xbox account, in my LinkedIn page or anything else. But the concept that as I earn Xbox points or Sony or anything else, that it comes into a centralized digital lifestyle
Mhm.
box subtly means that as I'm interacting with people, that AI or a variety of other metrics can say, hey, you're getting ready to meet with Jeffrey for a podcast. By the way, both of you guys have over 50 hours in this game. Both of you guys have traveled to these three cities. And suddenly, instead of having to seek it out and do random conversations, like this all exists. It's just hidden in these digital
Yeah.
warehouses by companies that they own it instead of you and I, which is where the value really should be created.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. It's funny. On my teams, I really prefer to work with juniors that have gaming experience, right? And so if you think about your wallet address as a tracker of your online reputation and exposure to gaming, right? It's a perfect use case where if I'm hiring for somebody that actually has legit experience in esports or in this type of Web3 game, then I can quickly look at the leaderboards and just say, all right, this person has clearly 1,200 hours. That's the type of experience that just by virtue of osmosis, they will be a value add to my ecosystem, from day one. And so I think that that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that it's one of those things, especially with millennials and Gen Z growing up, where I was a Nintendo kid and grew from there. Um, but the concept of LinkedIn right now, it's great, it's fabulous. We can say, did we work at any of the same companies, have we worked in the same asset class, did we go to the same schools, and those are all the commonalities in the business world. But nothing like that exists for gamers,
Correct.
and as you said, there's hundreds of billions of dollars that are generated, but they're siloed and kept really secret because the companies believe that that's their IP, that's they own these clients. How do we get to the point where we can have something that actually brings gaming into the forefront and stops treating it like my parents, like, oh my god, you're going to rot your brain? Like, how do we make this a real societal feature?
Yeah, I mean, one theory that has actually achieved some success is this whole concept of transmedia. And by transmedia, it's really about taking gaming IP that it has a TAM of gamers, right? And let's give an example of a zombie game. So taking the IP of a zombie game and trying to engage a much broader audience, so a much larger TAM, by having that IP almost transformed into different formats. And so by different formats, I mean not just in video games, not just on mobile devices or consoles or PCs, but let's actually make it a television show. Let's make that IP a
Hmm.
movie, right? Let's make that IP part of a theme park, activation event. Let's make that IP part of kind of an experiential room that you have to survive waves and waves of zombies that are attacking you. And so you increase and you expand the addressable market by doing that because perhaps somebody is intrigued by that zombie experience, but they just don't want to learn how to use a game controller, right? It's a little bit of a barrier to entry for them, or they just don't want to try to figure out how to install a game on their iPhone, right? A great example of this is The Last of Us, which started off as
Mm.
a gaming IP. It's a Sony exclusive, and they've come up with the TV show through a collaboration with HBO that has received very kind of critical acclaim and has dramatically broadened the audience of people who can say, "Oh wow, this was a gaming project originally. Let me actually make the leap and try to play the game just to see exactly what's out there." So it works in both directions as a feedback loop by expanding, by introducing gaming content into non-gaming formats. You're actually also increasing the size of the gaming pie itself, which to your question is the best way that you can bring it into the forefront. Because if you have critically acclaimed actors working in gaming properties, that means gaming is much more a part of or a stronger part of the cultural kind of zeitgeist of what's important and what's kind of leading, our minds or our subconscious today.
I absolutely, and we're going to have to expand on that at maybe a later podcast and really talk through it because it's a concept that I think most people don't understand. And let's just give Bored Apes the credit that they kind of really have pushed the hardest into this. If you buy a Bored Ape, and the IP is still a little fuzzy, and they're messing with it a little bit, but
Yeah.
we're not going to get into that a little bit today. But the concept is you can buy a Bored Ape, and theoretically you own that IP. You can that's your brand. You can create a movie on it. I think Seth Rogen or one of these guys was going to create a TV
Yep.
show based on his, and then it got stolen. And literally, he doesn't own the IP anymore because it's gone,
Yeah.
and he couldn't get it
Yeah.
back. But the concept is that there's a metaverse, there's a video game, there's TV shows that you're saying, look, this is a common thing that I identify myself as without my picture, but I own this IP and I can lease it, I can license it, I can do everything else. Um, does that scale? Does that should people focus more on most of these NFT projects are you don't actually own the IP in any way, shape, or form? Should more companies be selling the asset and the IP and the rights, copyright to it?
Yeah. So it's a gray area, as you mentioned. I think a lot of companies, a lot of major corporates are very hesitant to provide monetization opportunities for their IP to folks that are not them, right? And so the lack of clarity has worked out in the favor of the consumer today. But I think that over time, as this sector matures, more than likely, they're going to start coming down, down the hatchet with very large legal teams trying to say, "Hey, you guys cannot monetize this IP." That being said, I think that it does scale if corporates themselves are just saying, "Wait a minute, you know, even though this was not authorized, they were able to sell 200,000 NFT collection based on this particular avatar that we own. Maybe we should try to do something like that ourselves." That's also linked to some of our new releases in terms of new products, maybe kind of a new type of soda, or even new franchise extensions. And so maybe you have a sequel or a prequel coming out for a movie or a TV show, and you want that to coincide with the launch of an NFT collection. That actually is a really good way to further activate, and if you wanted to further monetize your base of consumers in a completely different format, and also build community amongst people that can say, "Hey, I have one of 20 NFTs that's related to XYZ property," for example.
I love that. That's fabulous. How who's really the market for blockchain games? Is it us, or are we really focused on kind of the Gen Z? It's very different. Where we spend our time. And my I've got a 15-year-old. And he has no interest in a bank account. All him and his friends have, Solana wallets. They generally use Phantom. They send assets back and forth. They like the Solana ecosystem. So it seems like they're already blockchain natives. Are we kind of just building this for them, or do we think that we're going to be able to onboard, the Gen X and others?
Yeah, I think a lot of the burden lies in the developer community, for better or for worse. And it's really about the question of, to get to that mass market consumer, do we really need all these different steps and all these different details in terms of signing up for a wallet address? Do I really need to remember this 21-word code and just keep that somewhere tucked away, not on the internet, in a bank vault somewhere? Or is there a way to kind of simplify and reduce the amount of friction that currently exists for a lot of these different Web3 enabled apps or games or experiences or what have you, right? I think that's really the critical question. If that is something that can be overcome, then the market is as big as the market is today for any type of Web2 opportunity or game or title or entertainment experience. And it's really, you've been successful in, reducing the amount of visibility of some of these Web3 aspects so that the normal mom and pop or grandpa or grandma can actively engage with this without the complication that is like that first wave of Web3 functionality. It makes it more difficult than it needs to be in a lot of cases. It's kind of like trying to install a very sophisticated space sim on your computer and having to manipulate the different system parameters to make sure that it runs versus having a console that you can just
Yep.
plug a disc in and you can play the game. That's pretty much what the difference is.
It's very early Web one,
Correct.
where I generally refer to, the ledgers, mine's around here somewhere, as like a 14K modem.
Yeah.
Like it's horrible, it's stupid, it's a terrible experience. But if you want to do it, that's what you got to
Yeah.
use. And we're going to evolve into higher speeds, and there's going to be special chips into all these computers, and we've already seen HTC building them into the phones.
Correct.
To be able to manage these things. So I think we're definitely going to get there. I always wonder, is it what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the game or is it the technology? Because to me it seems like Axie had the game and the technology together, just that showcased it could work.
Hmm.
But every attempt, from Fluff World, Illuvium, you name it, just has failed to garner any real adoption past their initial mints and
Yeah.
deployments.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the question I ask myself is, are those titles, are those games, are those virtual experiences too complicated to start with for the mass market consumer? Or should we be building something that kind of leapfrogs off of existing, gameplay dynamics that everyone already understands, like fantasy sports, for example? There's a lot of people that are very excited about fantasy sports. Is there a way to just incorporate kind of Web3 functionality into that kind of experience so that you can actually draw in some of the older Web2 denizens that are super fans of football or baseball or basketball or what have you?
Yeah, and we really haven't even touched on fantasy sports and other things like silks and their kind of fantasy horse racing, those kind of things.
Exactly.
So that we'll save that for another day. All right, so I got a big question for you. So you're familiar with this device,
Correct.
which is Zuckerberg's failed. My 11-year-old won't even put this on. He's like he likes the cheap one. He likes the little $300 one. He hates this
Yeah.
thing. Zuckerberg calls you and goes, "Dude, Jeffrey, I failed at the metaverse. Nothing works. I'm going to give you $10 billion to fix it." What would you do?
$10 billion to fix. So I would probably say I would look at the origin of Facebook. How did Facebook become popular in the first place? It became a platform and a channel that allowed you to kind of take a view into the life as just a regular college student of your friends, and even frankly, unfortunately, stalk a lot of people that you might be interested in, right? And so what is the common denominator in that? Really, just getting that mass market approval or mass market interest and engagement for something that they would traditionally do. I would try to, if I were going down the path of creating a device, it wouldn't be a 100% immersive 3D experience. It would definitely be an augmented reality experience. And I would try to make the glasses themselves, if we were going to use that form factor, or if it was going to be contact lenses, or even something even less ostentatious, or kind of less obtrusive. I would try to make it as close to what people would normally wear as possible, and just pump as much research and development expense into achieving that. Getting that form factor correct, and not even introducing it as a Web3 metaverse device. Introducing it as a device to make your life easier in this incremental fashion. It's kind of like with the iPhone, right? You started off with the iPhone, not a tremendous number of apps. The apps came later once you had the box in front of you, and then developers can kind of think, all right, we have user engagement. Now we need something for those users to do at the same time.
And it was a new form factor. People didn't know what to do with it or how to build with it. And even Apple, when they came out, didn't know how to put games on it. They go, answer the phone, send a text, you can look at a couple websites, that's it, take a picture.
Exactly.
The thought of FaceTime, the thought of file sharing, the thought of anything that we do on a modern, iPhone is really irrelevant, or wasn't even thought of back that day. Jumping, kind of just really quickly touching back on the metaverse and the side of things. I've always felt, and per what you just said, that the concept of Ready Player One, that you're going to put on a headset, go into a dark thing, put on a suit, and you're going to run around in some virtual environment is a long ways away. And in fact, it may never actually appear, just because that's not the way humans want to operate. It's very hard to have something in front of your
Mhm.
face. But I think Free Guy, would showcase you put the glasses on and it augments everything. You
Exactly.
look at a sign and it comes alive. You look at a person and it's giving you information, which was what Google Glass was trying to do. But that was what, 10 years
Yeah.
ago. What's the barrier to get that working?
The form factor. I think that's really the hardest thing to do, right? If you try to make it as small as possible, then it's going to use a tremendous amount of energy, and you're going to have a literal oven on your own head. If you don't care as much about the form factor, it turns into the VR device, the Oculus, or it turns into Google Glass, and then that means that you walk into somewhere with this augmented reality device, and like people will literally punch you in the face because they think that you're recording them. Right. And you're like
Yeah.
invading their privacy. So I think getting the form factor right and getting it accepted by the mainstream society is probably going to be the biggest barrier. And it's something that Apple is very, or at least has been historically very, very good at, where, you know, form follows function follows form in all cases. But it's
Mhm.
just very hard to do today with the limitations, quote unquote, of technology that we do have. Are we going to be able to get to a place where you can have very minimal, non-obtrusive lenses that have either augmented reality vision or virtual reality vision that you can actually dial in and out of? I highly think that that's
Mhm.
going to happen before 2030. But it's also one of those things that is it going to be a relevant technology 10 years from now, where 10 years ago people were saying that that's going to be something that's de jure today, right? So the question is there enough is there a large enough market that is willing to pay for those types of devices? We'll have to see, but we're making incremental progress, at least as far as I can tell.
Jeffrey, I am just absolutely amazed by really the scope and breadth of which you understand gaming, and you also understand, companies and infrastructure and what it takes to bring a game to market. We know that gaming is going to continue to increase, whether that's Web 1, Web 2, Web 3 games. It's people want to play, they want to feel engaged, and a little bit less, passiveness, just sitting on the couch like a slug watching content. They like being engaged. They like the thought of theirs, especially the millennials and Gen Zs, which is we've seen that clear increase in gaming. Where's kind of just your thoughts over the next few years of kind of the trends that potentially you see really surprising people that maybe come out of nowhere?
Well, one big one is not necessarily a positive trend, and the trend is that there might be a little bit of a dip in gaming engagement, right?
Mm,
And depending on how you look at it, if you were to do a survey of some of the major gaming industry news today, all you see are a lot of headlines around the fact that Activision Blizzard, yes, was acquired, but had so many different cultural issues going on kind of under the hood. Ubisoft is canceling games left and right, and there's a ton of issues there as well when it comes to are they able to produce the same high level quality AAA game that they had in the past. Games these days are suffering from, if you were to listen to the average gamer, an issue of excessive monetization, either through free to play or battle passes or downloadable content. You have so many different gates of having to put down your credit card in order to have a genuine gaming experience, if you can even call it that at that point. And so the other issue is the games that are being released today are actually being released in a very unfinished capacity, right? And so
mm.
great examples of that. There's a game called Anthem by EA, completely unreleased, 7 years in development, and was an economic failure. If we talk about economic failures, it was an economic failure in and of itself. A game I was very passionate about was called Cyberpunk 2077. So think, Blade Runner in a video game format, also in development for a long period of time, 13 years in that game. In that case, it came out and it was almost completely unplayable. I pre-ordered the game itself and played it for 15 minutes, took the game out, didn't play it for a full year later, right? So there's all these different factors that are suggesting that players themselves are getting fatigued by the gaming experience. There are certain things that are helping to increase momentum to prevent that from happening. But I think if we were to take a step back and say, all right, if we really want gaming to thrive and to survive, how do we do that? We do that by increasing engagement. What's one easy way to increase engagement? By having the users themselves be game developers, right? So user generated content, not just of cosmetics, but also gameplay and gameplay mechanics. How can you empower the average user with a limited set of skills to build very sophisticated games that are on par with the AAA studios, the Activisions, the Blizzards, the Bungies of the world. And one place that I don't know if you touch on, but I'm increasingly trying to have this category under the Web3 umbrella is
AI.
AI, right? So,
Yep. 100%. We're on board. It's an AI. AI is a Web3
all
technology.
right, I'm right there with you. I've tried to convince my own peers, but I think it's probably the next evolution where you can create procedurally generated characters, procedurally generated stories, procedurally generated environments to the point where eventually, and this is anywhere from 2025 to 2030, you can go from pure text to pure gaming experience where you're waking up in the morning, you had some amazing dream about some very fanciful alien invasion that involved who knows what. You write that down into the equivalent of a game developer's chat GPT, and within minutes or hours or however long it takes, you have a full-fledged game that comes out of that, right? And so that's really kind of the apex of what the future could look like. If everyone is a gamer, then or everyone is a game developer, then no one is, right? Which is part of the problem. And it's also an issue of discoverability. Netflix is having this problem. Every streaming service is having this problem. How, if you have so many different games and so many different titles that are out there, how do you distinguish them? How do you market them? Right? How do you go from a great gaming experience to a great economic outcome for this gaming experience? Those are questions I don't have the answer to, but we'll see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years.
I love that, and fabulous answer. And yes, by the way, tell everyone AI is a Web3 technology. You don't need a whole asset class because to me, I really do say that blockchain is a database designed for computers.
Yep.
Blockchain is not designed for humans. We can fudge around in it, but we're not very good at it. You have to be all seeing, all knowing every second of any transaction or any thought, and that's where AI is best. And blockchain is, in my opinion, built and will be continue to be built for customizable AI bots, which in the gaming world you don't want because they're generally aim bots and they ruin the experience. But in the development cycle, speed to market and quality control are huge, massive places that we can just every gamer would benefit around the world from having that technology integrated. And one day, I hope the holodeck, absolutely appears, and we can just say, "Hey, I want to go, shoot, zombies on a beach," and you walk in, and there you go, make it
Yeah.
happen. So I love this, Jeffrey. Real quick, how can people kind of really follow along with Galaxy, what you guys are doing, or if they want to invest with you guys, what's the next steps?
Yeah, next steps. Feel free to email me. My email address is jeffrey.uba@galaxy.com. So happy to share that. And we have a pretty active social media presence. I think it's Galaxy HQ on Twitter, but feel free to follow that. My presence is not very active. Personally, I need to change that, and so I think ChatGPT is going to come in handy there and generating new content on a daily basis. But yeah, I mean, those would be the some of the best pathways to do so.
Fabulous. yWhales, this is Jeffrey with Galaxy and formerly Galaxy Digital or whatever you guys are calling it. But really excited for the future, really excited for where you guys are going. Excited to have you back soon. And we'll talk about, again, a rapidly evolving asset class. That being said, yWhales, see you guys next time.